The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. Now today we have Cutter Woods, author, and we mentioned him a little bit before, so we're going to be talking to him about his new book that just came out on the 17th here, Love and Death in the Sunshine State, Story of a Crime. So welcome, Cutter Woods. How you doing?
Oh, great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Always a pleasure. So now this is interesting. Now, is this your first book?
It is my first book, yeah.
So that's an interesting... How did you get into writing? And I kind of know a little bit about this story, but I think it's kind of interesting. So tell us how you got to write this book and how it came about.
Sure. So, I when I started this book, I'd graduated from college not too long before, was kind of an English major, very typically at loose ends. I went down to see some family in Florida, and I happened to stay at this little motel on Anna Maria Island, which is on the Gulf Coast of Florida near Tampa. Didn't think too much about it. Left and never really thought I would go back. And then some months later, I got this clipping in the mail. My mother had sent it, actually, and it just showed this motel where I'd stayed just covered in flames, just this huge, massive fire.
Ooh.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought, well, that's strange. And as I kind of read more into this article, learned that this woman had disappeared. They'd been looking all over for her, and then this fire had kind of come out of nowhere. And what really caught my attention was just, one, this woman was just really a very kind of spectacularly interesting person, very, very loving, very thoughtful, very beloved in the community. And then so people's reactions to her disappearance were just absolutely strange. I read some in the paper, and then when I went down and started interviewing people, because I really kind of got hooked, they saw her at the dentist's office. They saw her at a bar with a man dressed like a pimp. They saw her at the Salvation Army and the Circle K convenience mart. Somebody saw her at the airport getting on a flight. The strangest one, I talked to a woman who was very convinced that very early on that Sabine had been murdered and that she was going to communicate from the afterlife via her pet parrot. So when I realized the effect that this was having on the place, I just felt like there was something there that needed to be explored.
Well, that's kind of a strange scenario. Did you know her very well while you stayed there?
Not at all. And in fact, I think we might have crossed paths once when I was out looking at her pet parrot.
Yeah.
And I think she might have been there too. But no, didn't know her whatsoever, really.
Wow. So do you know what kind of made you want to find out kind of the truth, or kind of go for the writing?
Yeah.
Was there a reason that drew you?
There was, in fact, and this is a decent part of the book as well. When I kind of got down there, initially I thought I would maybe write something about the way her disappearance had affected the community, and the way these people had kind of taken that space where there used to be a person and filled it with all of these fears and hopes. And the more I got into it, the more I realized there was a whole different story going on there. It was actually kind of about this woman's relationship. She'd moved in with a man 2 months before she disappeared. And it was kind of about the unraveling of that relationship. And it was, I guess what really hooked me was I also had just moved in with someone. My girlfriend then, now thankfully my wife. And we were going through some of these exact same struggles, why are there dishes in the sink? Why is there hair in the drain? These things where You know, and I would go through the court records. I remember going through the court records and seeing at one point in time her boyfriend in like a previous altercation had said to someone, "Why do you defy me?" And that those words just echoed in my head all the time when I would go back home after interviewing people, and I'd, be in this house, which just was no longer my house all by myself, no longer my own terrain, that was shared. And I was just always thinking, why do you defy me? So I felt a lot like my research into this was also kind of a very personal research about how to live, how to be nice in a relationship, I guess, would be the blunt way to put it.
Well, it's always a process, right? To live with someone newly, and everybody kind of has their own lifestyle and habits. It's a process.
Process is a very kind way to put it.
Well, because it's very seldom super easy. I mean, because the passion and love wear off somewhat, and then you're dealing with like hair in the drain, or someone that doesn't do dishes, or someone that leaves their laundry on the floor. There's it's just.
I should be clear, by the way. I was the one who wasn't doing dishes.
Yeah, well, I kind of figured that. But
yeah.
But that's just being human, and that's sort of what we do. Now, why do you think now?
Yeah.
Now, this woman was married as well as had the boyfriend. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
So
that's true. Yeah,
I was just going to say, where was the husband?
So they still live together, and he would never. He was a very nice man, very very kind to me. He actually let me stay at the motel while I was working on the project, but he didn't want to talk to me about his wife. I think he felt kind of that the case had been a little sensationalized in the local media, and he wasn't interested in partaking in it more.
Right.
So I want to talk about him, kind of protect his privacy a little bit. But they had just become estranged. They'd been married for a while, and it had become clear that they were kind of still friends, still co-owners of this motel, but were really very openly doing their own things.
Yeah, I understand that part. I know people that do that actually, and I just not. But she actually had this boyfriend move in with her.
So she rented an apartment for the two of them to live together.
Yeah.
So she had a house with her husband and an apartment also on the island with her boyfriend.
Wow. So she was busy.
Yeah. She was, yes. Yes, she was. She was definitely a very somebody who didn't let time escape from her,
Right. Right. She was making the best.
Something a lot of people told me she was exactly making the best of her life and just a very passionate person.
Well, so now I know you're trying to keep the husband out of it and the name, all that, so, but I was just one thing I wanted to. So, was he okay with her having a separate apartment with this boyfriend? Or do you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was very much a matter of contention. Not because my interpretation based on what people have told me, not because he was angry about the relationship, but I think actually because he cared about her and he felt like this boyfriend was bad news, possibly.
Okay.
So yeah, he asked that the boyfriend not be allowed to come to the motel at all. And that was kind of what drove them to get this apartment together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can see that. But, but then can I ask, do you know, why didn't they just divorce? Like, why not just, go for the legal divorce and move on?
Great question. And I can't say that I have the answer on that one. I don't know if anybody knows that, and I don't even know if they knew that, the answer to that one.
Because to me, that means if they're staying together for the motel, for the business, that's one thing. But why not divorce and separate, and you can still be co-owners of the motel, and you can still run it and split profits. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to be married to run a business with someone. So I just That's curious to me, unless they kind of liked it this way.
Yeah, I mean, my impression was they kind of had a nice life, even if they were no longer romantically involved.
Right. That's kind of
But
crazy.
well, yeah, it's hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah. So now, do we know how she met his boyfriend? How did he come into play? Where did he come from?
Great question. Yeah. So his name's William Cumber. He came down to the island in the early 2000s, kind of with a girlfriend from North Carolina. Did a number of different things. He had kind of a checkered past. I think he was arrested on a number of charges, and he showed up one day at the motel. He's a very good woodworker. He showed up at the motel asking if he could just do some odd jobs. And they took him on, and he met Sabine, who's the woman who went missing, and her husband Tom. And I think that day, or maybe 2 days later or something, the police showed up and arrested him.
Oh.
Turned out that they'd gotten the information to arrest him for an arson charge, and he was sent to prison, right?
Oh.
And then the strange and interesting thing here is that it's a very common thing, right, that he then wrote them a letter from prison just asking if they could, thanking them for their help and asking them if they could help him out at all, sending deodorant or shoes or things like that. And Tom, the husband, I think, was not so keen on this, but Sabine was a very, the kind of person who would help anybody she thought was in need. Particularly, especially, she was very, very gung-ho for animals, and I think she just had a soft spot for anybody who needed help. So she wrote back to him and eventually, would send him stuff. Eventually, I think, went to see him in prison, and they kind of struck up a friendship. And when he would basically get released on furlough, he would come and do kind of like a work release sort of thing at the motel. And over the course of all of this, they fell in love, really. So that when he got out, she had this apartment there waiting for him.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that if I had an employee that I just hired in 2 days, he got arrested for arson and put in prison, I'm not sure that I would continue to use that employee.
You can see why Tom had some reservations about this whole thing.
It doesn't make sense. Because 2 days or a couple of days, whatever it is, you're really not getting to know the person. It's not like you've been an employee for 5 years and you really know them, and so you want to help them. A couple of days is kind of like, oh, wow, that was a bad choice, and move on.
Well, this man, William Cumber, too, it should be noted that he's a very, very pleasant man. Fairly handsome. People describe him as handsome. And I think he explained things to her in a way that it made sense and didn't seem scary. He didn't tell her about much of his criminal history. When he described setting fire to this previous building, he said, "Oh, that was a place where they were selling drugs, and I was trying to do the community a favor." And it was only much later that anybody realized kind of what his past had been, and he'd been really in prison for most of his adult life.
Do we know kind of what his imprisonment has been? Obviously there was arson, but was it violent criminal history, or was it just petty thief, or what? What do you know?
Oh, it was everything. I went back. I ended up interviewing him a great deal, as well as another man who was a person of interest in the case. Person of interest kind of being a euphemism these days for suspect. So William's history was basically he committed one of the strangest crimes, I think, when he was born in Ohio and got married there, I think at 18 or 19, and realized or thought that his wife was cheating on him. So, and he knew that if he wasn't locked up, he was going to do something he would regret. So he just drove across town and broke into someone's house. So he would get, and this is his narration of events, but so he would get locked up to keep from doing any harm to his wife. But then instead of just going in and waiting for the police to arrive, he actually hid in a crawl space for a number of days in the house. And he would come out when they were gone and kind of almost seemed like act like he lived there, and then when they came home, he would go back into the crawl space. So kind of just a peculiar way of going about things, right?
Yeah.
And I think maybe because it was such a strange case that they really did kind of throw the book at him for that breaking and entering charge. He was in prison, I think, for pretty much 8 years. Got out, and then just kind of a whole series of violations, everything, from punching someone in the parking lot of a grocery store to cultivating marijuana to driving without a seatbelt and fishing without a license, Just seemed like if it was possible to get in trouble for doing it, he was going to find a way.
Yeah. But he hadn't murdered before, or at least that we know.
No. I mean, he had definitely shown some very violent tendencies. There was an affidavit, the thing I was describing earlier, there's an affidavit where he had basically taken someone by the throat and said, "Why did you defy me?" And that is certainly, any time someone puts their hands around somebody else's throat, that's a big signifier that they've got more serious intentions.
Yeah. That's
yeah. And I'm not just saying that as that's obvious, but there's really a connection between choking and later homicide.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So she gets him out of prison, and when he came out of prison, okay, so they've got the apartment. Did he work for the motel again, even though she was living with him? Like, did the ex-husband say it was okay, he can come to work here, or how did that go?
No, so he was banned from the motel. He'd been working while in prison, so he'd saved up some money, which he was living on for a while. And he also, he's I think I've said, he's an interesting guy. He's a self-taught artist, and he was trying to make a living selling his paintings on the island, or not his paintings, his drawings on the island, which I think was, as you might expect, maybe not going very well. Yeah. But he was, so he's an artist in woodwork, and he was trying to basically run his own business and make a living from that.
Well, so how long before he killed her, or she went missing officially? Like how long did how long did it last that it was kind of good in the apartment?
Yeah, I don't want to,
give it away.
For the sake of readers, don't want to give away exactly what happened, because the case was very much until, it took about, the entire case took over 5 years to be resolved. Most people thought there was never going to be a resolution. And during that time, there were really three men who most people were fairly sure one of them had done it. So I shouldn't cast William Cumber in all of the poor light here.
Right.
But it was only pretty much 2 months after they moved in together that she just one night disappeared. No body, no murder weapon, no real motive that anyone could identify for any of these three men who were thought to be suspects or persons of interest. So it was just extremely puzzling to the sheriff's deputies.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, of course, the estranged husband, the boyfriend, did she have another boyfriend, or who? Can you tell us who's the third?
No.
No? Who was the third?
So this is no, I can tell you who the third is. This is one of the things that made the case so strange. So she disappears on a Tuesday night, and she doesn't work on Wednesdays, so no one even realizes she's gone. And very, very early, like 3 a.m. Thursday morning, the police pull over this white Pontiac driving down the street on the mainland. I think it had a tail light out or had run a red light. They pull it over. They run the license plate, find that it belongs to this woman, Sabine Musil-Buehler. And as they're doing all that, a man gets out from behind the steering wheel and runs away. Yeah. So they bring in all the deputies and the dogs. They search this entire neighborhood for him and finally find him underneath this pickup truck. This man named Robert Corona. And he tells them that, oh yeah, of course, he had good reason to be in the car. He's been hanging out with Sabine Musil-Buehler all night, and she gave him the car to go get some drugs.
Oh.
Yeah, so that kind of, this is suddenly they realize, okay, well, they don't really know what's going on. They call this woman's husband to see what's, if he has any idea about this. He says, no, Sabine never would have loaned the guy this car. They go and see the boyfriend. He says, well, I haven't seen her in a couple of days. We had a fight a couple of days ago, and she just stormed off. That's like her. She's very, very passionate. And so they really didn't know what was going on or how to make heads or tails of this. And it wasn't until that Friday, when they've kind of had a chance to interview a bunch of people, they feel fairly certain that this is not just a missing persons case. This is much more serious. They go and they look at this car. They use luminol to check for blood. And there is just a lot of blood on the car. There's blood in the trunk. There's blood on the passenger side seat, where it looks like, a body was put in and pulled out again. There's a place in the back seat that someone has covered up with stuff, but where the cushion has been cut away, and this is all covered in blood. And that's really when the investigation took a very kind of dark and sinister turn.
Yeah, it would sound that way. Now, I can't figure out, so why did it take so long for them to resolve the case? Did they not find the body, or?
Exactly. So that was really the kind of the ultimate mystery there. And I was in pretty close contact with the detectives working on this. One of them actually retired in the middle of the case and then came back out of retirement just because this cold case was driving him crazy. And they were just totally stumped. They felt certain that she'd been murdered. They felt certain that she was somewhere on this island. When I first went down there, one of the strangest things, they were out on the beach with a backhoe and a professor of archaeology and a bunch of cadaver dogs, just digging around, hoping that they might strike on a body, basically. And they were just completely, they had a lot of ideas, and I think they had a pretty good idea of what had happened by the end. But without a body, they were having such a hard time making a case. They were pretty, I don't know if this would be a good way, if it would be good to say what they were doing, desperate. But they even at one point in time brought me in and asked me if I would wear a wire and go and talk to one of these men and just very bluntly say, I'm not writing a book of nonfiction, I'm writing a book of fiction. And if he had buried the body anywhere, where would he have done it in a book of fiction?
An O.J. Simpson method. If I had killed her. Well, okay, and then there's one.
I, of course, didn't do that, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Now, but one thing that's curious is, why was the motel burned? Because he didn't need to burn down the motel.
So this is something, this was kind of the driving question for me, actually, through a lot of this. I could see why one of these men might, in like a fit of rage or something, do something terrible, and commit a murder, right?
Right.
I couldn't understand why 2 weeks later, 2 weeks have gone by, it's obvious the police have no clue what's going on. After like the first 72 hours, there's almost no chance of finding a missing person. So it seems pretty obvious whoever did it had gotten away with it, right? and yet they're still in such tumult, still so torn up about this thing that they feel obliged to go back to this motel and set it on fire. That was so hard for me to wrap my mind around. And that's really kind of what drove a lot of the writing in the book, was trying to get into the psychology of the person who would do that.
Yeah. It seems
weird. It's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think you could ever give a black and white answer about that. I don't think that the person who did it ever really had a good answer for it in their own mind.
Yeah.
But I kind of think it has to do.
Well, it's some sort of distraction.
Go ahead.
I was going to say distraction. I mean, I could see it if you had the body in there and you wanted to burn it, or if you had evidence to burn, and unless
there was, as it turned out. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, unless it was someone that just didn't like the husband, and maybe it was nothing to do with her, maybe it was to do with him, and he had an enemy that burned him out or something. You know what I'm saying? There's other.
Yeah.
It's just strange.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of scenarios, and one of the fascinating things early on was that they, of course, this fire seems extremely suspicious, right? They're looking very closely to make sure nothing was burned in there, at a lot of pains to make sure there are no bones, or anything like that, right? And one of the strange things at first, that they thought that her pet parrot had been in there, and that someone had taken it out before the fire was set, and then set the fire. Which, if that was the case, shows such a strange set of logic, right? To be so angry on one hand and so thoughtful on the other, or something.
Yeah. There's a lot of dynamics there. That's crazy. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So now that you've got this under your belt, do you plan on doing more books? Is this kind of a future for you, or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of what I studied in school and what I've always wanted to do. I don't think I'll do. This project certainly became a lot darker and more personal to me than I had expected it to. You spend enough time interviewing people about these things, and I would sit down, for instance, with the missing woman's brother, and he would have all these photographs, and we'd go through them, and he'd tell me all about who his sister had been as a child and all this, and you could just see his jaw clenching and unclenching. And you can only do so many of those before you really start to feel affected yourself. I was having these terrible, terrible nightmares about this missing woman. So I think the next project will be lighter.
Yeah,
is my only hope.
Yeah, well, I can say it comes and goes. I've got 6 true crime books out on murders, and
oh wow.
Yeah, and it comes and goes. Because the one that I'm finishing up for May actually had a big impact on me, but more in a positive way than a negative. Because the other ones were always, you can get too much of that, I don't know, what you call hate and murder in your mind because you're going through it all. And like you said, meeting people and talking and researching, and you kind of get that real weird negativity. And after a few books, it's bad. But then all of a sudden you come across one book and you're doing it, and it makes you see things in a different light. I can say that this was, because it was a very hard case, but I'll tell you, it's changed me for the good, not for the bad. That's the best way I can cover it. So you just never know.
Yeah, I guess I'd have to say, although it took some time getting there, I did feel the same way about this project. In the end, kind of reflecting on this relationship and on my own, it certainly made me a better husband.
Yeah, there's things you get out of it and you don't realize at the time. And then when you look back at it, you kind of go, wow. Or you change in some aspects, but you don't see it in yourself until later. And then when you're doing something, then it's kind of, that's the best way I can say it. So not that I'm promoting writing murder books or crime books, but there's also a positive impact that you can get out of it. There's a lot of people that throw the negativity on it, but no, there is some good that can come from it.
I think, my take on it is if you can recognize, if you look at the psychology of someone who's done something very bad, and if you can recognize some features of your own psychology in there, and how you can improve yourself from it, that to me is kind of the best possible thing you can take away from not just a book about crime, but from any book.
Yeah. There's a lot. It's a lot more complex than just killing. So.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
Yeah, if anything, killing is like the simplest part.
Yeah, that's kind of like just the end game, but there's so much more to it. Well, so now your book is available now. It's available everywhere, and of course Amazon. And it's Love and Death in the Sunshine State. And that's the story of a crime. And that's brought to you by Cutter Wood. Thank you for taking the time, being on the show, and hopefully we'll talk again.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.